Okay, here we go. So a very warm welcome to our 117th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, where have you been? There's 116 you've missed out on. Well, they're all on the website for you to catch up on. And the idea of thought leadership is that what we try and do is we critique what's going on today in order that we may think about what a better type of security provision looks like going forward. And today's topic is one that has emerged from a lot of previous conversation on previous webinars. The insider threat. How serious is staff dishonesty and what do we do about it? This is a massive, massive, massive problem. And it's one that's often kept a little bit in the dark, in the shade, because organisations have in the past been accused of being somewhat reluctant to admit to the scale of the problem. Not today, though. We've got 4 experts from around the world who will be offering their insights on this topic. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves. Once they've done that, I'll invite them to make their opening statement. That is 3 minutes for them to say whatever they want to say about this topic. And once they've done that, we'll come to you and invite you, the audience, to ask questions. Now, can I please invite you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen? And if you get your questions in early, we'll endeavour to come to you. So without further ado, let's meet our panellists. And first of all, let's go to David. David, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm David Butler. I am a partner and head of civil fraud at London law firm Fox Williams. I've spent the last 15 years or so, amongst other things, acting for and against corporations who have been the victims of employee fraud.
Thank you very much indeed, David. So let's go over to Lithuania and meet Egis.
Hello, everyone. I'm Egidijus Gailiūnas. I know it's sometimes difficult to pronounce my name in full, so you can use the short form Egis if you need this. I am in the field of security for about 20 years, about 10 years spent in National Civilian Intelligence Agency, and was interested and still am interested in the topic of counterintelligence, history of counterintelligence, and last couple of years I'm employed by Lithuanian Appropriate Authority responsible for aviation security. I'm not directly dealing with insider threat issues, but as supervising institution, we are related to the topic, and as I said, it's my interest for many years. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Egis. Let's now go to Martin. Martin, can you introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Speed, and my knowledge base is around retail and analytics. I work for River Island, the long-established British fashion retailer. My career started at the sharp end of retailing as a couriers manager in East London. Since worked for several retailers, but always along the lines of the analysis and research and modelling, which contributes to reducing losses and improving profits. I have done some work in the public sphere in sentencing and policing and youth justice, an MSc from Cranfield in crime risk management, and a PhD from Surrey, where my research topic was developing a targeted approach to managing retail employee dishonesty.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. And let's finally go over to the Netherlands and meet Elsie. Elsie, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm Elsie van Os. I'm a psychologist by background, a clinical psychologist, but I have experience in military intelligence and security multinationals. I was the head of threat assessment for Shell International, looking at actually outside threats. Thereafter, 5 years ago, I set up an insider risk firm called Signpost 6. And with Signpost 6, we service both the private sector, focused on insider threats of organized crime and espionage. Organized crime more, for instance, in the harbor environment, espionage more in the technology sector. So it's quite broad, but solely focused on insider risk management.
Thank you very much indeed, Elsie. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Many of you write to me and tell me how good we are at getting panelists. 4 experts all coming at this from completely different angles. Let's hear how completely different they are by now listening to their opening statements. 3 minutes they each get now to tell us whatever they want to say about this topic. David, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. I'm not sure I'll be 3 minutes, but I'll try my best. I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think the answer to the question, how serious is staff dishonesty, depends upon the perspective from which you look at it. At a macro level, when you compute the total amount lost to business that's attributable to employee fraud, and of course you can only make a best estimate of that sum because of the vicissitudes of trying to calculate it. It's a staggering amount, according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Their best estimate is that employee fraud accounts for some $4.5 trillion or £3.5 trillion of lost revenue annually worldwide, or as they express it, 5% of all revenue generated by corporations around the globe. They base their estimate on 2,000 or so cases that their members looked at in the past year, which together produced losses of about $4 billion, or on average $1.5 million per case examined. When you drill into the details of these cases, actually, I mean, fraud happens in all aspects of corporate life and in all directions. But what you see, interestingly, is that only 21% of the cases examined produce losses of more than $1 million. And the frauds that cause the greatest losses are usually those committed by owner-managers or those occupying senior executive or management positions. Typically, the frauds involving the greatest median losses involve the falsification of financial statements and the misappropriation of company assets together. Which is to say, essentially, that the senior people in the organisation defrauded the company in some way, and then covered it up by falsifying the accounts. And I acted on a claim years ago involving losses of $5 billion, where the alleged fraudster had done that very thing. In fact, it was much more complicated than that, and there were allegations about false banks and all the rest of it being set up all around the world. But as you can see, there is a correlation between seniority and severity of fraud. Cases of asset misappropriation alone, i.e. theft of stock, falsifying orders to get commission payments where there's no entitlement to that sort of payment, are by far the most common form of employee fraud. But they also cause the lowest median loss to the employer overall, about $100,000. Even though they take sort of 12 to 14 months to discover. So is employee dishonesty serious? I mean, I think we have to say the answer is yes. But we also have to acknowledge that there's a correlation between seriousness and seniority. And much of the fraud committed by junior or mid-level employees will not create an existential threat for the employer in financial terms. But what employee fraud does create, usually in my experience, is a need for significant commitment of management resource and the destruction of trust in the individual employee and the systems in place within the employer. Discovery of a fraud will often lead to the suspension and usually the dismissal of the staff member or members involved, perhaps consideration of civil recovery or criminal. And all of that takes time, and depending on the size of the employer, can create an unsettled workforce or department. That's pretty much what I had to say.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed, David. Set a good context there. Appreciate it. Eggus, over to you. Your opening statement, please.
So I'll continue what David said, that I think it's essential to have this commitment of management in dealing with insider threat. Now it's very popular topic, and thanks to Martin for bringing up this essential topic, I think now. But if you take a look back in history, you'll find that it's nothing new about the insiders, about the insider threats. If you take a look at the history of counterintelligence, you'll find that all that history is somehow related to insider threats in one or another way. So we are bringing numbers and figures now, but actually the threat exists for many years. And what I'd like to point out that important aspects that you have to keep in mind while dealing with this threat is, on one side, that you have intentional and unintentional insiders who cause harm to the organizations. So it might be financial losses, reputational harm, and so on. But on the other hand, you have different types of insiders, like self-motivated insiders recruited by outsiders. It might be criminals, organized criminal groups, terrorist organizations, some state actors. And as I started with this history of counterintelligence, there is another third type of insiders. I would like to call them plants, deliberately sent into the organizations with concrete taskings to cause harm to a particular organization on behalf of a hostile foreign state, for example. And yeah, that's all from me.
Egos, thank you very much indeed. Very, very helpful. Appreciate that. And like the point about plants, not really considered that for a while. Let's now go to Martin. And Martin, your opening statement, please.
Okay, well, retail's a little bit different from either the insider threat from the big individuals, the senior managers that David's come up with, or other threats in, say, aviation or banking. It's more the death by 1,000 cuts, lots of individual little crimes which altogether make a significant risk to the business. So 3 points to get things going. Point 1, detecting and arresting dishonest employees, certainly in retail, is rarely economical. So if you want some evidence of this, ask any retailer what proportion of their unexplained losses they attribute to insider crime. They'll generally say about 30%. Now ask them to put against that the value from everybody they've detected for dishonesty in the last year. The answer is usually about 2.5%, or to put it another way, they'd need 40 times the resources to eradicate the problem if there were a simple linear relationship between detections and resources, which of course there isn't, because they're only catching the people who are easiest to catch. Prevention is way more effective, way more cost effective, and the research evidence shows that you can seriously reduce your losses by simply being nicer to your staff. My second point is to recognize an emerging trend for dishonest employees not to leave a system's footprint. This is hardly surprising in retail. The majority of our potentially dishonest staff were born long after we introduced till monitoring. So it's now only a minority of the naive who think that they ought to leave any trace within systems. So for example, in the old days, if you wanted to do sweethearting, handover theft, you wanted to give your accomplice the goods without the inconvenience of them having to pay for it, what you used to do was go through the transaction and then void it. But of course, that leaves a voided transaction record. So nowadays, they up their acting skills. They make it look as if they're doing a transaction on the till, but actually they never touch it at all. And my last point is that despite the aspirations of some employers and security teams, our managers and staff are never going to become Sherlock Holmes and detect dishonesty. But what they can do is be very effective at preventing it. To achieve this, there needs to be a really good focus on continual improvement, operational excellence that removes the opportunities for internal dishonesty. And perhaps this could be linked to the old crime prevention technique referred to as broken windows, responding very quickly and effectively to every minor transgression. And when you do that, you eradicate the opportunities for people to introduce much more serious security breaches. So 3 quick points from me, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Excellent points. And we'll just say to the audience, don't forget, if you want to get your questions in, use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen for questions, and we'll endeavour to come to you after we've heard from our final panelist. Elsine, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I thought I would just focus on the COVID-19 crisis, just to make sure we all have a different story to tell and a different angle to take. Because inside a threat and COVID-19, there are a lot of considerations there. So the COVID-19 crisis will have a permanent impact on the world and the geopolitics by which it's governed, the way we do business and the way we work together. And there are 2 broader categories of threats in this domain. Firstly, the geopolitical Cold War, and especially the hunt for vaccines, increase the risk from espionage, which is exacerbated by the organizational changes in organizations, so redundancies and also working conditions, working from home, etc. And that is really a perfect storm for nation actors trying to reach insiders. And secondly, the pressures on employees resulting in unintentional mistakes and there with data losses, as well as most importantly, health concerns for employees, but consequences for their personal lives. It is really important mix of important factors, really on the intentional side and on the unintentional side, if we're talking about insider threats. And this requires a new focus on appropriate measures to conduct safe, secure, and continued business in a profoundly more turbulent environment than we've had in the past, even more so. And a comprehensive approach provides the basis for oversight of the critical assets and countermeasures to address insider risk holistically, because that is really what is needed. It improves the context of concerning behaviors of individuals in your organization by combining signals from numerous technological tools with human observations. So these aspects are both important. So there are a lot of technical measures being taken in the insider risk management domain, but there's also a requirement for human observations. And perhaps more important, the staff that has been trained to be alert to insider risk indicators, and they can prevent co-workers from doing damage to their organizations and themselves. Now, many organizations have started the process of setting up such programs. Even before COVID-19, we've seen a big change, a big development there. COVID-19 has changed the threat landscape and elevated insider threats. But this has been a tendency in the last couple of years that we've seen developing already. It's just taking more of a high now. So as a reminder, it's also not COVID-19 alone, but it's also our stronger reliance on our digital environment that makes us much more vulnerable nowadays. As an example, in the past, people walked out of the office carrying boxes of information. Jonathan Pollard was one of these examples. And now we have libraries on our USB sticks that we can take with us and distribute throughout the wider world. So yeah, these risks have definitely elevated nowadays, and there is really a growing awareness within organizations.
Elsine, thank you very much indeed. So fantastic. So we've got four opening statements, 4 different takes on this, and some fantastically interesting issues covered. Let's see if we can go straight to the questions. David, let me come to you first, and I'll come to you, Egger, straight after David. And it's from Michael Gibbs, David, who's a former panelist. And he's talked about the breadth of this subject matter, something you said yourself in terms of the range of people that are engaged in, the different sums involved. And I guess the question is, how do you begin to approach this? I mean, is it a case of breaking it down offence by offence, perhaps, or type of employee by type of employee, perhaps? Is there a way of beginning to think about this, about how we might categorise it, how we might use that classification as a way of thinking progressively about crime prevention? So we'll come to David first, and I'll come to Eggers after that.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess, I mean, there are certainly different forms of employee dishonesty, and so you could look at it. And I think the trouble is it's so ubiquitous and so wide-ranging that you could alight on any one of 40 different aspects of a corporate life and say fraud happens in that area. And as we all know, employee dishonesty or employee fraud occurs when there's incentive, opportunity, and rationalization. That means motive and opportunity essentially. And just touching on a point that Elsin made a few seconds ago, I think the remote working environment created by the pandemic recently has is a category on its own, because it presents all sorts of opportunities and incentives for people. Opportunities because they're not working together. In the finance function, there's no looking over your shoulder to a colleague to say, what do you think about this transaction? Does it look suspicious? Because everyone's working essentially solo in their silos, but also increased incentives because people start to think, am I going to have this job in 6 months' time? Is this employer going to exist in 6 months' time? So I think you could slice and dice it any way you like, really. I would sort of categorize, I suppose, from my perspective, I regard employee dishonesty as something which, because I guess of my profession and my background, I would say incurs a pecuniary loss to the employer, i.e. some form of financial loss, whether that's in terms of money or lost value of resource or lost market position or something like that. So that's how I would define it.
Very helpful, Dave. Thank you. Let me come to you, Egger. So from a different angle, and it's about how we begin to approach it. And Eggers, when you talk about someone being planted on the inside, I'd almost forgotten about that as a track, because I suppose as we move to the new world, if we're to be believed that people are going to stay working from home, that's going to be a different thing. That's not going to happen anymore, or not in the same way. Is it, Eggers?
Yeah, well, a lot of changes, I think, and new emerging threats, especially related to all that new technologies on the digitalization. That from insider threat perspective, you can steal much more now from the company, from the organization, all the sensitive information, commercial secrets, and so on. So it's probably easier, and in bigger quantities you can take from an organization, cause them bigger harm. But everything is evolving, and now it's very difficult to have and actually to say it's impossible to have 100% effective insider threat prevention program, because there is no magic, no silver bullet. So I think to start dealing with this kind of threat, you need at the beginning from the security program, from the insider threat prevention program, to start from the simple things. Like I participated in one webinar about cybersecurity recently, and yeah, the instructor said you should start from basic, from the updating, from the patching, from antivirus. So the same approach, I think, should work in this case too. You start from the simple things. You watch for the red flags. You do the background checks. I saw in the chat there was a couple of questions about polygraph, about so-called lie detectors. And if you look at the history of intelligence, counterintelligence, you'll find out plenty of cases where this security equipment hasn't prevented insider threats from causing harm. So it's not, as I mentioned, 100% proof system that we can create, but we should strive to do our best to minimize the negative consequences from these risks associated with insider threats.
Egos, thank you very much indeed. We've got a lot of questions coming. I'm going to move on. Elsie, I'm going to come to you first, then you, Martin, on this. Elsie, I'm coming to you first because it's something that you mentioned in your opening statement. And Neeraj Sharma is really building on that. And it's talking a bit more about the way in which COVID-19 has changed the internal security environment, and particularly the threat landscape for tackling the insider risk. So in other words, Elsie, just to elaborate a little bit more on precisely how COVID-19 is going to make an impact and how that might feed our thinking on what we do. And Martin, I'll come to you straight afterwards. Elsie first, please.
Yeah, so I think it's changed the threat environment on a variety of levels. I think I touched on the geopolitical level. So we see now much more, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, threats emerging, definitely from a cybersecurity point of view, but also from an insider risk point of view. Everybody is on the hunt for vaccines and everybody wants to get that piece of information. So from an information security point of view or IP protection point of view, that is a force to reckon with. How does that play out? If we're talking about insider threats, you have external parties actively trying to collect information from people through means, for instance, of social engineering. That could play out in terms of approaches on LinkedIn, getting in touch with individuals in key positions, attracting that type of resource. So getting new people on board of your organization, but also trying to socially engineer them to acquire information. So
Elsie, just on that point, Elsie, can I ask you a question on that very point? Is it possible that by working from home, that social engineering task becomes easier for an offender? They haven't got the sort of people around them to, as David was saying earlier, is it going to be easier, more risk to a company that people are not in an office working together or not?
I think a factor that is at play here is that people have job insecurity. So they're more active on, for instance, these LinkedIn websites, so stating that they're open to work, etc. And that's, of course, very interesting for outside actors. So that's a force to reckon with. Some people are more active through their social media anyway, because they don't speak face to face with people. They're more outspoken in social media, which is, of course, again, food for information for external actors as well. So you'll definitely have that interplay. But I think we also have to be mindful of people's personal health and stress factors. It's not only about people wanting to do anything maliciously, but people's health that maybe pushes them over the edge to look elsewhere. They're very uncertain about keeping their jobs. So it can naturally be a situation in which people are looking elsewhere for jobs and making a lot of efforts to get that job and taking information to them. So there's a lot of flow of personnel going on as well. And we all know that people who are leaving organization, 80% of them take sensitive information with them. So with that flow of employees moving from job to job, you have a natural outflow of information as it is. And another factor that is important to be aware of is in the HR space. So now going forward, employees are more demanding of their job environment. Some people want to keep working from home, and they might find a job that suits that environment better, or their wishes better. So now HR has to really compete with, companies need to compete with in a global setting where people can work virtually for companies all over the world, while before you had at least a physical restraint. You wanted to stay in the Netherlands, you're looking for a job there. So yeah, I think to retain your expertise, and that's also an insider threat there. So you want to retain critical expertise within your organization. It's more of a challenge nowadays, and especially going forward. So that is also, I think, something to be aware of.
Elsie, thank you very much indeed. Martin, can I maybe bring you on this from a retail perspective? Because I guess it has different implications there. Does it make much difference, the pandemic and its implications, Martin?
Very interestingly, in our stores, when they came out of the pandemic, losses even as a percentage of sales went down considerably. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that suddenly processes changed a lot. Now, Every customer coming in is being monitored very carefully to see what stock they've touched, making sure they wash their hands, making sure their face is covered. And the insider threat obviously went down at the same time because of the overall reduction. By inference, the insider threat went down as well, partly because the cover had gone, because it was much more difficult for external theft, partly because the stock was being much more carefully monitored to see where it was going. But there's probably also a reflection of that operational excellence aspect. Suddenly management were not being lax about anything. Suddenly simple procedures meant people aren't going to die. So they really focused on them. So there was that real concentration on doing the little things really well, which tends to remove the opportunities for bigger insider malpractice.
Really interesting. Thank you. What an interesting contrast between the two worlds you outlined. Okay, look, we're gonna move a bit faster through the questions here. Dave, I'm going to come to you next because it's a good question for you. And I'm going to ask you if I could answer this in 40 seconds, David, which is a big question to answer in 40 seconds. But it's Mo Jackson says, what would influence senior management to realise the scale of insider threat and to resource a response accordingly? What's going to persuade senior managers in advance, David? Seems a good question to ask you.
Financial incentives.
Carry on.
Bonuses for ensuring that systems are implemented, a report and sort of transparency in company reports about measures that the company's put in place to actively prevent employee fraud, and technological measures. I think AI, artificial intelligence, has a lot of potential in this area to spot unusual transactions. I think the use of that sort of technology will be increasing in future.
Yeah, and I guess it's in the great scheme of things, it's not that expensive, is it?
Not compared with how much it will save.
Yeah.
But from some senior managers' perspectives, of course, the last thing they would want is artificial intelligence, because it may be them that's manipulating the financial statements and abstracting the company's money. So, but I think with all fraud and with all employee dishonesty, reducing incentive is the best thing. It's the best way to reduce it.
Thank you, David. August, you've also got 40 seconds. Same issue. I'd like to know this point about realistically, what's going to get organisations interested now in the scale of the problem, do something about it. Is what gets them interested. I'm interested in August.
You mean the management perspective?
Yes. Yes. What's going to get them interested in this before it happens?
I think you can take this model of return of investment. How much you will put into insider threat prevention program compared to the losses, like David mentioned. Prevention is much cheaper than dealing with consequences, and it was always in dealing with the security threats. I think, like the topic I'm interested too, like terrorism threat. Yeah, dealing in advance with prevention programs, it's much cheaper, and lives are saved because some actions were taken and some programs implemented before that happened. After it happens, you also get the reputational damage that is very difficult to deal with, and it costs huge money. And I think some companies might even get.
Okay, so
out of the market because of insider threat and the damage caused by them.
Okay, thank you. We lost you for a second there, but you're back, and thank you very much indeed. Let me move on. I'm going to come to Martin, then Elstine on this. Listen to this question from Nick Downing. It's about two questions, really, which I'll combine. The first one is, what's headline issue? How do we go about prevention? What's the message of prevention we've got to sell, number one? And I wonder if I could be really cruel on you both, because I'm only going to give you 40 seconds each, is just to make a comment on organised crime in this. Martin, am I right in thinking that in your case that's not such a big deal in retail, or not? Carry on.
Oh, organised crime is a considerable impact on the business and does often relate to the insider threat. We've got gangs operating in some cities that deliberately place gang members in employment or pick on particular people working for us who they know from their local neighbourhood that they can lean on to get them to people to collude with them. So yeah, organised crime is definitely an issue. And I've spent my 40 seconds and can't remember what the first question
but here's
was.
a headline issue, Martin. It's about what's the key process for selling the prevention message? We're getting this now, right? You're all coming through going about the benefits of prevention. It sort of sounds obvious, but it's not obvious because it's not being done. Martin?
Well, I think from the management, from the top level, there's a question of getting the right context, so to speak. Within retail, the death by 1,000 cuts, you can see what the unexplained losses are into which the insider threat contributes. But it's very easy for management to put in place strategies that counteract against prevention. So the question of giving employees enough time to operate the systems that prevent theft, the collusion in incentivizing people unrealistically to achieve targets, which means that they naturally start to bend rules to overcome systems in order to hit the target, which tends to give a cover and the wrong context for people to remain honest.
Okay, Elsine, am I right in thinking that if you're a well-run business, that's your best prevention about against insider threat? Just be very good at what you do. Elsine?
No, not
okay,
necessarily.
carry on.
So, briefly coming to the organized crime topic, read the latest Europol report and you see that crime is hardening, extremely even. So there where you saw earlier on like socially engineering people to do what they want you to do, now is point blank blackmail that's happening, even getting your family blackmailed, etc., so that you're doing what they want to do. So that environment is very much hardening. And that really brings me also to the point of prevention. So we're talking about employee dishonesty, we're talking about malicious actors, but actually there is a responsibility that the organization has for its employees. If you're an organization that's being targeted by organized crime, data theft, etc., then you need to be there in support of your employees in the first place. So if we're talking about preventative measures, I can mention quite a few, but I've selected three. One is organizational support to employees, caring for your employees, especially during this COVID-19 period, but help employees to reduce stressors, maintain a hotline, etc. So if there are employees in need or having issues, have a really good confidential hotline in support of your employees first. The second one is oversight. There's information out there in organizations and the dots are never connected. If you have oversight in an organization, you have good governance, there are various ways in which signals come within the organization, but oftentimes the dots are not connected. So make sure that you have oversight, you have information flowing from these hotlines, from line managers, from technical tools, coming together to build a whole picture on an issue. And that's two. And the third one is really training and development. So people need to be trained about notifying concerning behaviors, understanding the problem, etc. And I think that's awareness aspects or components. really needs to grow, and it's definitely not out there in organizations yet. So there's a whole world to win there as well, and that's very much a prevention measure.
Thank you very much indeed, Elsin. David, let me come to you. We've got just a few minutes left. I want to get a few more questions in. David, Gordon Knight has been asking a question about those who've left their employment through COVID-19, and we've already just heard about the risks. I mean, I guess that the fact that so many take information with them, do you think that's a big worry that's going to come to the fore later? Or could we be in danger of overstating the concern that those who've already left are going to pose a threat going forward to those already currently still working?
No, I think it's an enormous problem actually, of course, when you're on the way out, you've got every incentive, every rationalisation, and quite often you've got the opportunity. And everyone, or not everyone, but many people want to make a quick buck on the way out of the door. Some of the things that are most important to a business are its confidential information, or its trade secrets, or its intellectual property. And there are lots of people out there that would pay handsomely to get hold of a competitor's trade secrets. The special sauce, the secret recipe, the algorithm, whatever it might be. All of this stuff is very valuable and a highly prized asset. And so there are big incentives to employees to try and steal this stuff.
Okay.
And the law doesn't often operate as quickly as you would like. You can't often prevent the genie getting out of the bottle, and it's quite often difficult to put it back once it's gone.
Yeah, interesting point. Yeah, I mean, you can go to the law, but as you say, it won't be quick. Elsin, very, very quickly, I'm going to ask you just in 30 seconds this same point about, do you agree with David, this issue of those who are leaving because of COVID? It's a big problem awaiting to come to the fore. We're only going to find out later how big it is, or are we exaggerating? Very quickly, if you wouldn't mind, Elsin, 30 seconds.
Yes, I agree totally. I think with what David has said, in general, it is already a problem. Like 80% of employees are already taking data with them. In COVID-19, you see many more movements of personnel, people with insecure livelihoods. It's not that people have malicious intent necessarily, but they want to make sure that they are able to survive. With that, it is just likely and more that data is being taken. So it's a force to reckon with. And it requires employee lifecycle management until after termination of an employee. So always make sure that you keep a good relationship, even after people have left the door, because employee loyalty is a big mitigator against an insider threat, and also communicate about what should be owned by the company and what is yours. People who really take information, they think that rules don't apply to them, but at least the rules need to be communicated.
Thank you very much indeed. Martin, very quickly, you and Grant, levels of management. Martin, do we know anything about the relative responsibility? And I suppose that I'm not thinking about committing the offences here. I'm thinking about responsibility to do something about it. You can set the example from the top. Presumably, it's got to run through every level to be meaningful.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that context has to be set all the way down through the organisation. But I think the atmosphere is very much set from the top. Thinking of the people who left in the COVID times, the difference between different organisations in how they treated their people was marked. I would hope that River Island was one of those where people left feeling very fairly treated and involved in the whole process. And I suspect that contributed greatly to a reduced threat from those people. Okay,
thank you very much indeed. We've run out of time. We could go on, there's more questions, it's such a big topic. So thank you so much, panel, for your insights. We will continue this debate. It's clearly got enormous implications. There's so much more I wanted to know from them, actually, but we will return to it. But thank you so much, panel, for your insights. Absolutely fantastic. A few final comments, if I might, just a few other things that are going on. Slightly related to this, we've got a project going on at the moment. Should reporting of fraud be made mandatory? Should it be compulsory to report fraud for organisations? That research is going on right now. We'd be interested in your thoughts. If you've got a moment you can spare to talk to us, we'll be very interested in doing that. Please do just let us know. Another major project on security officers, those on the front line. We want to know what they think about their job. They're arguably the front line of the window on which the world judges the security sector. What do security officers think? Please encourage them to complete our survey. Just got this week to go. Also to let you know, the Outstanding Security Performance Awards, entries are open in Kenya and Romania, in Benelux, the headlines are Bavak there, in the USA and Germany, headlines are Software Team Spot Software. Those countries, Oscars are open. Please encourage your colleagues in those countries to enter. And Techers, nominations are open in the UK, the Tackling Economic Crime Awards, those in any area of economic crime. Recognising those who do an outstanding job is vital, as this very webinar has encouraged us to understand. Also to let you know, the Outstanding Security Cyber Awards, Cyber Oscars, they are here, and all those associations are signed up. We want you, please, to encourage them to enter. Entries are open. There's lots of categories. In fact, what we'll do, we'll start showing you the categories each week now. There are lots of categories. Please encourage your colleagues to enter the Cyber Oscars if they're outstanding. And finally, to say that we go through it all over again on Thursday, the same time. The question is our image of security. What are the best bits? What are the images of security we should be talking about, or we should be conversing with the world about? Well, we've got 3 panelists who are going to be offering their views on Thursday, and my sense is they're taking a different angle on that. So look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Thank you once again to the panel. Thank you so much to those who asked questions. Don't forget, a copy of this webinar will be on the website tomorrow for colleagues who've missed it. I'll also be writing a blog that will be on the website tomorrow. I hope, however, I'll see you soon, ideally Thursday, same time. Until then, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.